Okay, and we're recording. Welcome everybody to our first virtual bargaining session. I know we've got a tremendous amount of work ahead of us, especially considering our current circumstances and as we move forward to the new school year, and also working through some of the issues that have been left unresolved. I wouldn't be surprised if some of our emails and cell phones start dinging and going off right around 2:30. The governor has scheduled a press conference in Hialeah, and he says the topic is strictly education. So we'll see what that entails. Some of the conversation might be directly related that we have today. Couple of housekeeping things, and Stuart, if you have some recommendations to add, just setting a few norms and parameters for our virtual bargaining, since we're heading down uncharted path here. I'll share my screen now, just with which is, can you guys see the agenda now, or do you see a Zoom screen?
I see your shared screen.
Okay.
But shouldn't we start with the impact bargaining?
Well, I figured that is absolutely fine with me, but I'd like to set a few norms, just if that's okay. Well, it's our first time out with this, and also maybe a couple introductions I have for my team. Basically, all the meetings are recorded, and we agree to send the recording to you guys, or if you guys are hosting from Zoom, agree to share the same following the meeting. Separate parties will be responsible for providing accommodations for your own caucuses. We have a separate Zoom meeting set up for our team in case we have to caucus. And just so you guys know, Ms. Sycamore, I will share hosting capability with her for this meeting. So if we all need to log off and go to a caucus, then she will still be in the meeting as the host, and we can just rejoin using this same original link. Basically, it's a little different because we can't, sometimes we tend not purposely to talk over one another, but we'll do our best to allow people to complete their thoughts before someone else provides a response or a new thought. And if we could, for documentation purposes for Ms. Sycamore, as she's taking roll, each team, if we could go through and just say your name, and that way she can check off roll for minutes. And then if we have any visitors in the room who are not acting parts of the bargaining teams, if they can choose to announce themselves, I guess, and if they choose to remain anonymous, or if sometimes people are represented by a phone number if they join in, I guess that's their choice. So we can start off. I'd like to introduce a couple of new members on our team. Mr. Sador. He is the principal at East Ridge Middle School. And we're also lucky to have Mr. Jeff Williams, who's principal of Claremont Elementary School. And they're replacing two fine gentlemen who served us well on our team for years, and Mr. Rob McHugh and Dave Bordenkircher, who we are all envious of, who've moved on to a wonderful life of retirement. So I'll start with our role from our team. I'm Chad Farnsworth.
Dorinda McKinney.
Linda Shepherd Miller.
Stein.
Julie Llewellyn.
Michelle Hoppenstad.
For Williams.
And I will say, you'll see Dave Myers on the screen here. He's just as a visitor. He is not on our bargaining team at this time, but he is assisting the district with all things COVID and employee relations related. So I think it's wise to have him listen in. So I'll hand it over to you guys.
All right. I'm Stuart Klatt.
Tony Beckett.
Kathleen
Campbell.
Amy Gordon.
I don't know if they heard that. It's Kathy Smith.
Liz Schlatter.
Okay, is that all team members?
I think for right now.
Okay, and if any visitors would like to announce themselves, feel free. Okay, hearing none, we can proceed forward. As usual, you know, the agenda is a pretty loose thing, just something to help us organize a little bit. Stuart, I agree. We can start with the impact bargaining. And I'll pull that up also. LCEA was nice enough to share some guidance on impact bargaining. And if Stuart, if you want to go through your document and either we can make stops along the way and discuss, or we can present the whole thing and then circle back. I'll leave that up to you.
Well, I know safety and health is going to be a utmost issue, no matter what the governor says today. We do know that there was CARES money for certain activities, and I think the areas that we're definitely going to have to cover the minimum today is
Stuart, I don't mean to interrupt. If somebody could, if you're not mounted or muted, if you could mute your microphones. And I'm having trouble. You're breaking up a little bit. I don't know if that's just me.
okay. Is that better? Hello, is that better?
Yeah, it's much better.
Yes.
All right.
Much better.
So I think we need to look at availability of personal protective equipment. That would include masks and shields, especially for our elementary speech language and other teachers who might or prefer a shield rather than a mask. I think we need to look at, are we going to require masks for certain student populations, or what are the other options? Hand sanitizer, cleanliness of classroom, social distancing. And I know they say 6 feet, but that's assuming that you're looking at a pinpoint. People are usually broader than a pinpoint. So I think maybe 7 feet would be a more realistic number given. And so it'd be 49 square feet per person, depending, and then the size of the room would then determine how many people can be in that classroom at any given time. Then we'd have to look at 30 minutes duty-free lunch, personal needs, restrooms, etc. Are we going to do brick and mortar with the option of hybrid? What are the thoughts on what kind of instruction are we going to be doing? So I think those are at a minimum that we need to be looking at. Are we going to need to do physical barriers in some of the classrooms? So the whole concept of large meetings, I guess the county had an issue with large meetings just recently. How is that going to be handled? So those are just some of the issues that off the 30,000 foot view. Then we can get into, if a teacher tests positive, is it going to be administrative leave? How are we going to quarantine that individual for a period of time? How are we going to What happens if there's a major outbreak at a given school? We've got a lot of issues to be looking at for our safety and health and before we even look at reopening.
Yes, I absolutely agree. For those of you in the room that are not familiar with some of what's going on as far as planning um, for reopening, we've got a task force that's met once and we meet again tomorrow. And a lot of the issues that Mr. Cladd has brought up are going to be discussed as some preliminary options of what our approach will be in that group, which includes LCEA representation, SEIU representation, school representation, and a few others peppered in there from the district staff. You know, we'll be examining some of what the possibilities are tomorrow in a presentation. And I think once we see what comes back out of that committee, we'll definitely see, okay, what are the true aspects that are going to require impact bargaining. And you know, most of these things we've listed off here have a lot to do with working conditions. So we are going to have a lot of talks within this group. And I think our time is going to be limited and extremely valuable as we go through and look at these. You know, Stuart mentioned that regardless of what the governor says, and which that kind of puts us in, obviously we're in a tough spot from a school district standpoint, in that, you know, ordinarily our mission is to drive out the directives from the state level government, and the last thing that we've heard from them was, you know, an expectation of face-to-face school starting in the fall. And then, as we all know, the climate has rapidly, I don't know what you call evolved, probably is the best way to describe it.
Evolved.
Yeah.
Are we inviting anybody from the health department or parents to this meeting tomorrow?
I will have to check on as far as who additional has been invited to the meeting. I'm not exactly sure how the group has expanded. But I can let you know as soon as I have some verification on that. I'll try and get that this evening.
So should we be discussing these items and give the task force our recommendations?
I think we can. I think we definitely need to discuss the items and share them where we are seeing eye to eye at in the bargaining process and where we have more work to do. Yes, sir. I think that's a great idea. So, I mean, I think your document really does a good job of laying out the concerns. And there's a preliminary document that the superintendent sent me late this afternoon or earlier this afternoon. It's not that late yet. It just seems like it. That shows some preliminary school campus safety. That was developed following our meeting last time and under the expectations of what the governor sent out last time. So, like I said, everything's evolved since then. So I'll be interested to see how the conversations go tomorrow with the task force. But I did take some notes. If I can share some thoughts on the document you provided. I think right away we see that conflict of what CDC guidelines on reopening as should only reopen if, and some of those boxes, it doesn't seem like they're feasibly going to be able to be checked. And then we have an expectation at the state level to open school at the moment, face to face. Could change in 15, 20 minutes, who knows? But basically, some of the things are addressed and regardless in the document the superintendent provided me, and I'll display that in just a minute. But the ability I think the readiness to protect children and employees and at a higher risk and vulnerability, I think we're absolutely going to do the best we can to provide PPE and meet whatever regulations we can to ensure that the best we can. The ability to screen students and employees upon arrival, that's one of those sticking points I think is going to be very difficult, and the feasibility of it is going to be very difficult. And you'll see that I think the recommendation currently is that temperature checks will be conducted on any student or employee or visitor who exhibits any COVID-19 symptoms on any school or district workplace. So it'll be a matter of identifying those who perhaps exhibit symptoms that are within the scope of our responsibility to be able to screen them with a temperature check. And there's all kinds of, I know, and this is outside of my department, so I can't speak directly to the process yet, of ways to isolate and processes and procedures once something has been identified as a health threat.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that in some of our nurses stations. Can we have a section for isolation of students pending parent transportation or?
Yeah, I think I think it's something that's going to take some thought and will likely be difficult in some schools to figure out. But at the end of the day, it's got to be figured out. So I feel like that's something that can be achieved. You know, I do think the widespread accurate testing is available. I feel like our testing is improving as we see more and more people are being tested every day. And the contact tracing, had a little experience with that lately, and it seems to be what the health department works very well. And two things that are paramount in that, and that's a concern that comes up later in your document is people's privacy, but also making sure that we're being responsible to protect those who could have had a possible exposure. The downward trend of new cases in the community for 14 days, we definitely aren't checking that box right now, right? So
Definitely not. In fact, in Lake County, it's going up.
yeah, there's not many counties. You know, there's a couple of places up in the sticks where I'm from that, you know, are probably hovering around a normal line, somewhat normal. But in most counties, I think they're seeing some upward trends right now.
5,500 just in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, that's wild. So we, you know, we're gonna do the best we can with the guidelines that we've been charged with. You know, as I go down the list, everything seems pretty feasible. The suspending of standardized testing and teacher evaluation, you know, we all know that's not a district decision, but I can tell you, you know, I feel like I can speak for our board and our superintendent, and we're going to operate whatever leniency that we're provided with no consequence. Then we're going to go to that line and make sure that we're doing what's best for kids and teachers and all staff.
Back up here.
Okay.
Temperature checks, can't necessarily do it on everybody. Who would be responsible for either identifying who needs it, who would do it, and what would be the outcome if someone did have elevated temperatures or exhibited some symptoms?
I know that a push, you know, we want to make sure that we have a nurse in every school, and we're close to that if we're not there. But we will, and that responsibility would fall upon the nurse. I would assume. I'd have to make sure, but I do not. The temperature checks at this time, I don't think would fall upon a teacher's responsibility. You know, I do think every adult on campus has a responsibility that they see someone exhibiting suspected symptoms to report those to the appropriate contact on the campus. So I know we're trying to get as many of the infrared thermometers on the campus as we can, but that'll be a responsibility that will move to the front end of the building. I imagine it's going to fall on the nurses there.
Chad, do you have any idea of how many parents are looking at some sort of virtual schooling? I know that just because the McKay goes through the ESE office, the person in charge of that was talking today about she was having a much larger than average amount of phone calls requesting information about that.
At this time, I do not have an accurate estimate on that. I know we're working in the background to gain that, and we're looking at the process of, all right, how do we get real quality data that gives us an indication. So I do not have those numbers right now, but I know it's something they're working diligently to try and figure out.
I know Miami-Dade, in their studies, they basically, it's 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. 1/3 of the parents say traditional brick and mortar, 1/3 virtual, and 1/3 some sort of hybrid instruction.
And that's why, at first, everybody's like, why haven't y'all done a survey? Why haven't y'all done a survey? Everybody's surveys were coming out in thirds. Orange County's was like that. And it's like, you're not gaining a whole lot of information when it comes out in thirds, except for, nobody's going to be happy, or maybe only a few people will be. So, I think it's going to be a matter of, I know I've seen like in Pasco, they sent out a survey trying to identify, some different things. So we're looking at what some other districts are doing to get accurate data, and so we can, I see that developing very quickly over the next couple of weeks of, how do we influence families to go ahead and make those decisions.
You said you had something from the superintendent already?
She went ahead and sent me a document that had to do with school campus safety and bus safety that is going to be presented tomorrow, but she felt it was important that we look at the topics there. So I can go ahead and display that now. Let me make sure I didn't. There were a couple points. Well, let's go ahead and do that so it's not like there's a mystery, and then we'll talk about the other stuff.
Thank you.
And mind you, this is created based on our current recommendations from the state level. And it's on a full school day coming back and with all students on campus and brick and mortar. So we'll work to the safe social distancing there. It's just like Stuart mentioned, nobody's a dot on the floor. So, and I'll email this to you guys, and that's not a problem. I need to save it, mark it draft, watermark, and all that good stuff. The social distancing is going to be a challenge. I mean, it's going to be impossible. We've got every kid on campus within a classroom, especially, even at the 6 feet, and not broaden it to the 7 foot like Stuart suggested. That's going to be a difficult challenge. I think our classrooms will probably measure to hold about 15 students if you were social distancing at 6 foot tomorrow. I feel like on the PPE and cleaning protocols, that stuff that we're going to be on top of. We're procuring all of the necessary supplies. We're making sure that, no matter what circumstances we're in classrooms with that, that's not going to be a barrier as far as PPE, whether it be masks, face shields, soap, hand sanitizer, possibility of any type of barriers I know has been looked at. You are correct. We've experienced some group gathering, which was interesting, and definitely there. I think we're going to be in the approach of if a large group gathering that you can't socially distance, especially involving adults, can't be done in Zoom. I mean, I don't see why it cannot. I've been in some humongous Zoom meetings since the onset of all this, so I feel like that's definitely something we can work with. Right now, cloth face coverings, we haven't moved to a point of mandatory, but right now we're strongly recommending for students, employees, and visitors. I think the main thing is that we want to try and provide those if as long as our supply can meet the demand, and I feel confident we'll be able to do that. But I think we're going to run into issues, and I'd like to hear you guys' more thoughts on the face coverings. But I think we're going to run into issues when that becomes mandatory, whether it's from the state level or if it's something we elect to do locally. I think we're going to run into some issues, and I'd be curious to hear your initial thoughts.
Well, I do know for a lot of teachers I've talked to have talked about face shields, especially if they're working with elementary or in a speech and language situation. They can be cleaned, reused. Now the masks, I know you said that they would be available when teachers went back to do pack up students. I know of several situations where a teacher asked for a mask and gloves and was given one mask and one set of gloves and said, this should last you all week. No, that's not the way it has to work. So now the CARES Act is paying for the PPE. So will there be limited of supplies, or will the teacher get what they need?
I'll commit to that. The teachers are going to get what they need. I think early on, I think nobody really knew what to expect as far as masks and using them and reusing them and different things. So I can tell you right now, I feel like my goal is my goal, and what I've expressed the senior staff is that at the end of the day, I'd like for a cloth mask be provided by the district for every day of the week for each employee in the district. So at the moment, that might be a lofty goal. I know we're trying to get it in, but at least then, they could have a different mask each day that's cloth, reusable, and could be washed and laundered properly so it's properly sanitized. If you look at what it would cost for disposables every day, I mean, the prices just get astronomical. It's amazing how price gouging is not allowed, but is allowed. But so that's kind of my goal as far as that goes. The face shield thing, I think that's coming up more and more often, and that's the one where I think definitely there's some critical folks. I think you mentioned in other conversations, whether you're working with kids with disabilities who might project fluids more often, or whether you're dealing with younger kids that are a little snottier than usual, or whatever the case may be. I think it's going to be a matter of supply and demand on the face shields, but I think those are actually pretty easy to create with a lot of companies. So I know there's companies that are just wheeling those things out right now, but it's the whole nation that desires them. So we'll have to see how the face masks go, or shields.
Now, what about the cleanliness of rooms and surfaces? Is that going to be an expectation of teachers?
And that's definitely something I want to discuss with you guys. Because I don't think cleaning and cleanliness is necessarily something that should fall on the teacher's plate. I think for their own good and us operating as a team to keep the environment as healthy and safe for teachers and all adults and kids, some light sanitation, whether it be the Kobe wipes or some disinfectant wipes. If you have a group of students that are leaving your classroom or your area, a quick wipe down of desks or hard surfaces, I think would probably be advisable. So I wouldn't want to rule out that, is anybody going to be there to police and be able to know whether someone's doing it? But I think not ruling out an expectation that a light wipe down of a surface doesn't seem unreasonable. What are your thoughts as far as light sanitation?
I think the teachers have enough on their plate that they don't need to be adding that to it. I mean, this is going to be tough for everybody. And the less that we add to somebody's job description duties, I mean.
So I guess I will pose this. If you're in a secondary school and students are moving, teachers are staying put, how would you be able to sanitize in between do a light sanitation in between each class if that's what we're faced with. And that's just, and I'm not putting you on the spot, I'm saying that's the challenge that we're looking at.
So that teachers would be able to do that. I mean, I know that many of the teachers, we only have, 5 minutes or so between classes. And a lot of times we're talking to students as they're leaving or coming in. You can't greet them if you're sitting there cleaning desks. So that becomes a problem. And there's a management thing. If they're cleaning something, then they can be contaminated. So I mean, it sounds like it's an easy thing, and all things great. I think it would be, but many teachers are standing at the door, trying to. I mean, we're building relationships with kids, and then now we're doing wiping, and I mean, I'm not saying it could never be done, but I think to expect it to be done diligently, and ultimately, these things aren't supposed to be haphazard. I have an older husband, and I have an older mother, and it's not like, is it convenient for me to stay safe? Everyone kind of needs to work together. And going to your question about strongly encouraging people to wear face masks, well, the problem is that generally the people that don't want to wear the face masks, they're the ones that are asymptomatic, and they're the ones that are passing the stuff on. And they don't want to wear the mask because they're healthy, so they think, and they're the ones that are causing the problem. And in high school, I foresee that being, more of the issue. They're not the ones that are necessarily going to be hospitalized, but they're the ones that can bring in whatever they're doing as they're sucking face in the hallway. And then they're sitting there coming to your classroom, coughing. I don't know how many of them don't wash their hands on a regular basis anyway. They're the ones that are going to be carrying things. And that's where we run into problems.
Expectation of bell-to-bell instructions. You got the expectation of monitoring hallways. You've got all these additional expectations that are already on a teacher.
Well, and I'll tell you, and that brings us to, perhaps, if a student is, maybe the recommendation falls on the student to lightly sanitize their area before they leave the classroom. And then it's going to be up to the teacher to, if they will choose to sanitize their hard surfaces, then everybody's kind of responsible for their own space, perhaps. And that might be something. I don't think that's, you talk about all the things the teachers are responsible. I think the students might have a little room on their plate that wouldn't hurt them. So maybe that's a suggestion we discuss tomorrow. As far as, oh, go ahead.
I thought that the CDC recommendation was to have the fewest amount of people moving, so that it would be more students staying put and students moving. Are you saying that has already been discussed and that possibility eliminated?
I don't think any possibilities have been eliminated. I think that if you look at the difficulties that are posed with, you can cohort at the elementary level, obviously a little bit easier. And where there's still going to be challenges as far as limiting full movement, depending on if we're giving them the full realm of required educational experience. But it's when you get to that secondary level that it poses extreme challenges as far as cohorting students. And another hot topic we're gonna flow into here is what do we do with lunch? Because that's another huge barrier. And how do we make sure that teachers' time is respected, and we don't run into sanitation issues with lunch in the classroom. And I think it's kind of hard. You balance those things out to where it almost leans towards you do have to open a cafeteria and limit occupancy somehow. like I said, nothing's been ruled out, but these are how do we try to make the impossible possible under what the state's expectations are. So I think we'll try and cohort kids the best we can, and then there's going to be times where it's very difficult.
Now, I see the school board is going to be discussing reopening plans on Monday. So have there already been plans developed, but independent of the task force or bargaining?
So again, that no decisions have been made. Today is the purpose of today is to introduce some of these ideas. So we are holding true to the bargaining process, and then you guys are represented on that task force. That'll be there tomorrow. When we left that task force meeting last time, it was said that we'll bring back a preliminary draft and then discuss with everyone's input on what changes need to be made to that draft and what the current situation looks like at that time. So I'd imagine the discussions that the board members that will be witnessing the task force meeting tomorrow, but are restricted. I think that will give them the opportunity as the governing board over all our functions to actually weigh in and voice their opinions in an appropriate open public meeting. So nothing has been decided independently, but we are charged with laying a framework for the plans. Otherwise, it would never get done. So we've got to lay the frameworks for the plans and then allow the task force to provide feedback and then make adjustments from there.
So what kind of discussions have taken place so far for like band, music, art, PE, where we definitely have larger groups of students, in some cases small areas?
I think that's stuff that will be probably in that draft education plan that will be presented tomorrow. So I can't quote those directly. I know we're looking at trying to, if you look at the bottom bullet there, utilize outdoor or larger than normal venues for activities that increase possibility of transfer of airborne particles like chorus, band, phys ed, ROTC, when feasible. And I think it looks like probably outdoor when possible. If you've got a small chorus room that you're doing classes in, what are your options to do there? What are your options with band to make sure kids are spread out the best as possible? I know band can get pretty slobbery. We gotta make some decisions that helps with that. So they'll probably have more specific detail within that plan, or it'll definitely be part of the discussion. I mean, the whole thing is we don't want to get too far along down the road and then be accused of not providing people to give input. So,
Chad, so we're wiping down buses. Don't know who's going to do that, but that's SIU's problem. And we are going to expect adults and students to wear face coverings. And we know that if we only expect it, that's not going to happen. So there's nothing else that we're going to plan on doing for safety, distancing, or anything for our students?
I can tell you that we'll start with the face mask. Do you guys have a position on face masks? An absolute position?
I personally would like to make it mandatory for students and staff. I understand I'm coming at it from a different perspective than a classroom teacher.
I absolutely agree. But I also know that also is going to hinder teaching, because a lot of students who have hearing problems, or a lot of your ELL, or even you know, a lot of people use a lot of their lip reading to comprehend. And so I think it's going to be an adjustment, to say the least. But I think that under the circumstances, I don't think that leaving it optional is acceptable, because there's too many people that could end up ill, because of people not necessarily doing what they need to do.
Liz, the research that I have done is showing at this point that face shields are as or more effective than a mask. Now, there are obviously some difficulties with that, but I do think that that seems to be, if you purchase the right ones, a safe alternative for teachers. And that would be helpful for ESE students who need to have that visual feedback from the teacher.
Yeah, I definitely think that the face shields would help, especially under those circumstances. But so I hear you two. What is there a consensus from LCEA whether masks should be mandatory or optional or strongly recommended, or do you guys have a position? And I understand if you don't at this time. I'm not.
I think the shield would solve the problem for any of the staff that would have breathing problems, you know, any faculty or staff that have breathing problems that can't wear a mask. So then the shield would even help them and still give them some type of protection, I assume, if what was just stated is accurate.
And we've got to create a culture where masks are acceptable, if we're even going to highly encourage. Because I know there have been situations where teachers have asked for a mask and were scoffed at by the administrator. So we've got to change the culture that they're protecting other people, not necessarily just yourself.
No one should be being scoffed at. So if you want to let me know what that individual situation is, I'll be more than happy to address it.
Give you that info.
I think you're right, and I think that's the mindset of the superintendent as she's trying to work within the parameters from the state, and making some type of framework recommendations. Is that, you know, we do have to create a culture where it is acceptable, and if we're providing and offering as much as possible, and then I definitely think it will become an acceptable thing. Because I agree, I think there is some peer pressure involved, even in adult settings. You might have 100% of the people in the room with no mask on, but chances are there's 20% in there that probably would prefer to wear one, or maybe even up to 80%. Who knows? That would prefer to wear one, and all it would have took is a critical mass to wear them, and it'd be full compliance. You know, it's gonna be interesting. Mandatory. You know, let's say the unions agree, district agrees, mandatory, that's what's going to happen with the adults, you know, but we're obviously outnumbered by the little critters that are coming with the germs. So how do parents react, and what will that look like as far as getting compliance in line? So I think these are going to be ongoing discussions, and we want to prepare to be able to do the best we can with it.
Well,
I would think that the sooner we can get that information out to parents, because going around Lake County at this point, I would say that masks are not being used that frequently in the general public, judging by the public's people. But at least if we could say to parents, this is something that your child is going to be expected to wear, if they had a month to start practicing that with their children. Lots of parents want to get their children back in their free daycare system called public education. So if they knew that they needed to do that, I think they might perhaps be more motivated.
Yeah, I think we're in designing and working through the committees and getting all this input. Immediately after concrete decisions are made, I know Ms. Owens is building the framework for a major push out of information and a campaign to really express our expectations across the community. So that's definitely a big piece of it we've talked about as a priority is the communication and messaging way prior.
Now I know as teachers, we have to enforce wearing IDs. And we have lots of students who don't wear their IDs, let alone masks. How did the graduation go where all the graduates were given a mask with their school logo? How was the participation? How did that work? How did that work out?
I'm fortunate enough to have 3 experts in the room here. You guys want to speak to how that went?
That did not go very well. There were several people that wore them and several people who didn't. And to not make an excuse, but it was just really, really hot. But I mean, you had people hugging that shouldn't have been hugging either. So, but I think part of it is, it's not a standard that's there in Lake County. I live here in Orange County. It's a standard here. It's a standard in Osceola County. And so we just don't do those kinds of things to that level. But I got verification on pictures that show that they didn't follow directions. But that was students and staff.
Principals, what were you guys' experience at your graduation?
My kids wore theirs because I gave it to them the day of. So all of them wore them across the stage. Now the social distancing 6 foot, we kept them separated, but when they were getting lined and coming in, nah, they kind of do what they want to do then because there's so many of them.
I'd say 3/4 of our students wore them. We gave them to them that morning, and they did wear them, except when they came across the stage with a picture. So 3/4 of them wore them.
And my students all received masks the day of graduation. However, if they were on stage talking, their masks were off, as mine was. And then once they left and went back to their seats, they put their mask on. But once they finished with their, and they were 6 feet apart, because one of the guidelines stated at the very beginning that they could be 3 feet apart if they were wearing masks. But if they were not wearing masks, they had to be 6 feet. So we at Lake Mineola did 7 feet. So we were within the guidelines if they chose to take off that mask once they came back from walking across the stage and receiving their diploma.
Okay. Well, and so that kind of tells us it's going to be a mixed bag on our kids probably.
So
And
Brenda, how is that going to work in elementary?
Well, I think we'll just have to, we're trying right now to kind of put some plans together. We've, trying to, little ones, just have a very difficult time. So but they'll sit where we ask them to sit. Some of the things like in the cafeteria are going to be difficult just in the fact of maybe not enough space. And so trying to get some more tables and possibly doing things a little bit different as far as before school and after school. The thing with elementary is the supervision type thing. So it's not like we can just say, go outside and that kind of stuff. We have to properly supervise them in order not to be negligent. So some more detailed plans that have to go with that, but we're going to be trying to work it out.
Okay, thank you. If we go with smaller class sizes for social distancing purposes, can we use the CARES Act money to hire more teachers?
I know that there's parameters on the CARES Act money, in that I know you can use it to properly staff and keep people employed. So I'm gonna have to, that's a question that we'll have to pose towards Mr. Ward tomorrow at that meeting. But I know there are some limitations. They've broken it up into buckets and they tend to give you guidance last minute on those things. But there is, what they've requested is that we submit an application. And when you submit that application, there'll be a whether or not for approval on that. And so that's something we need to get the confidence level from Mr. Ward on. But like, let's say we do have tons of money to hire additional teaching units to cover smaller classes, then you run into the limited space. We've already got schools that are packed to the gills, so we're going to run into.
Not if a third of the students want virtual instruction.
Well, yeah, you never know. But I have a sneaking suspicion, like someone said earlier, the parents are ready for their kids to get back in school.
Yeah, true.
So, I'm curious about what our adult compliance would be as far as personnel with masks, not just teachers, but all positions. Because, if we jump out there and say, well, it's mandatory, how many folks are gonna refuse to do that? And then what happens then? So, the mask thing's a little bit difficult, but I feel like from a bargaining standpoint, we'll have to make arrive at some decision of what's acceptable. I feel like compliance is something we can build, but enforcement is going to be where the rubber meets the road, and consequence when enforcement breaks down.
Yep, that's going to be an issue as well.
So I don't think, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've arrived at any definitive statement on masks.
I don't think so, but I think for teachers, but again, depends on how we social distance. If we have all the students facing outside walls or the walls in the room, maybe there's ways of doing that. All of them facing the same direction. So there are some options of how we do the social distancing in the classroom that would benefit masks or no masks, one way or the other.
So we'll see what the proposed plans look like and what the discussions are tomorrow. And I think that's going to evolve, that discussion. I think, the way things are trending, people are becoming day by day, hour by hour more acceptable to wearing the PPE. So we'll see what comes there. If I can back up to the screening, what do you guys feel as far as, because the screening issue as far as temperature, were you guys okay with screening the people who we suspect symptoms or issues with?
Again, the only concern I would have is who's doing the screening. Okay. If it's the nurse, yeah, I got no problem with that. If you're expecting teachers to be the nurse's aide, I think we're asking a lot from teachers to do that.
I think for elementary, it wouldn't be any different than what it currently is. Students tell their teacher they don't feel good, and the teacher sends them to the nurse for a temp check. So I don't think there will be any difference at the elementary than how we've currently been running.
You might just have to tell teachers no more back of the hand for the forehead check.
Don't be mama. Don't be mama. You're not mama. You're not the nurse. We have that covered.
And then we'd have to have some sort of isolation in the nurse's station if someone does exhibit.
And that's going to be the challenge, figuring out what's acceptable isolation, because then you can't close the clinic down for, with other students that have other needs, whether it be medication or other boo-boos and instances. So
And they still need to be watched.
Yeah.
I see it being a huge issue because, you know, October, I mean, I think about this just because I'm a cheerleading coach. The reality is that usually about October, November, we start getting ill, and it's just your standard cold or flu. And so then you're going to mix that into the mix because we don't know which one it is. You've got people that have been away from each other since March, and so you can kind of increase that happening. But you also need to keep in mind that just because someone doesn't have symptoms doesn't necessarily mean they're not asymptomatic.
That is true.
And then can we have the health department or somebody come in and do training for teacher staff of the symptoms and how to differentiate between COVID and maybe a cold or flu? So it's not just a teacher or someone trying to make that determination.
Yes, sir. I think I've got it's being sent to me. I made the request this morning. I'm supposed to be reviewing some training materials. From what I hear, the video is like 20 minutes, and then there's an additional video that talks about face coverings and things like that. That might not be something that it will be available type thing. So I'll let you guys know as soon as I get a good preview on those, and that'll probably likely be a discussion tomorrow. So, training, I think we've got a couple, I think safety protocols and identification and social distancing, we've got that leg of it. And then you've also got the training for, okay, what does it look like for teachers from a technology standpoint? Because as Elizabeth said, when we do have some upticks, a mixed bag, what happens if we do have some closures that are isolated closures, let's say one school, because it's out, I won't pick on any area. We'll just say one of our schools that lies on the outside, that can be somewhat isolated to a community. How do we prepare those teachers to make sure that they're able to continue their way of work the best they can? Because I think, the curriculum that we had to pick up and the things we had to use there when we had the emergency closure, I think, well, most of what I've heard is, that's probably not the greatest, that's not the greatest method of making sure these kids get the education they need. So one piece of training that I wanted to mention was as far as if Google is going to be our platform for Google Classrooms, and we want to be able to provide some autonomy within that platform, what are you guys feeling as far as making sure all of our teachers are Google trained, and within that training, at least setting up the framework for Google Classroom?
Well, in Google Classroom, they didn't like having to turn around and dump that and use Edgenuity when they had been using Google Classroom all year. So I think a lot of it's going to depend on the teacher's professional judgment, what's going to work for them. Liz brought up cheerleading, which then I know colleges right now and even some professional athletics are having real problems with entire teams or a majority of teams testing positive. So then that brings up our athletic situation.
Well, it's definitely, I can tell you, I'm reviewing a document that was sent to me yesterday, and some of the parameters that are being set, I can tell you, again, it's going to be very tough to meet those parameters and still be able to hold events normally. So I don't have a full review done on those yet. We did, there are some voluntary summer workouts that are going on, and we've got parameters set on those, and we've been checking. And, the folks have been doing a good job of staying socially distanced, coaches wearing masks, properly screening kids. So they're not allowed, it's phased out. Their kids aren't allowed to touch balls and things like that yet. So it's mainly like condition and things of that nature. But there's other safety factors that have to be considered. You know, if all of a sudden they say, okay, well, let's go in the fall, and none of these kids are conditioned or done anything they're supposed to do, that puts them in danger also. But I can tell you, looking at my initial look at this, the requirements are pretty steep.
Will all the staff, teachers, faculty and all, will they all be tested?
Tested as far as before
Before school starts?
Yeah, I do not know that. That's a good question. And that'd be something that we need to bring up tomorrow with the task force. So you're saying like just an initial baseline screening before everybody comes back? Do you feel like that? I mean, that's one of those things that we're probably going to need you guys to take position on, as far as what if someone says, no, you're not screening me. So that would be something that became a mandatory issue that we would need you guys' support on if that was the road we went down.
I wasn't saying that we had to, I was just asking if that was anywhere in the plans.
Gotcha. I have not heard that, Liz. But just right off the top of my head, I was like, okay, well, that doesn't sound like a bad idea. Or there's documentation of within a certain period of time, perhaps, that people were able to get one. But here's the thing, it's so fluent that heck, you can be tested today and then go get infected tomorrow. So I'm not even sure that will be, I think the symptoms are the main key with adults. I think the kids and the young adults, and probably some of our teachers who are young adults and employees, heck, they're going to be running around looking healthy as all get out and be asymptomatic. So the control factor on all of this is, debatable.
I agree with you.
And and it's like, okay, you do a lot of work to reduce numbers, and transmission only takes 1 to 1, and so I don't know that we can create the level of safety that we all desire, but we need to do our best to take as many precautions as we can. That's for sure.
What about the athletes?
That comes down to reviewing that document. I know I need to get deeper into it and see what parameters they have for that. As far as you talking about on competition or just in general? So what else do you guys have on as far as COVID related questions?
Okay, if teacher does test positive and need to be quarantined, would that be administrative leave, or are you expecting a teacher to use their sick time for that?
And we've got based on what we currently have, contract, board policy, and federal law. We're working on creating a document that would kind of be a reference guide, and basically what we would provide up till December 31st is what the federal guidelines are. We would provide a emergency COVID leave, and it could be COVID related, and that will be up to 2 weeks worth of leave. And that 2 weeks worth of leave, that's basically equates to the coverage of a quarantine. So you get into, and this is what my administrators have peppered me with questions a lot on this, but it boils down to, it's going to be setting some parameters and then working with the individuals to see what qualifying factors are there, whether they would move to, they also have an emergency FMLA that exists right now, but that has to do with caring for your children or someone that you're a caretaker of someone with disabilities, and that has some time limits on it. But then if you were to, let's say, you use your 2 weeks and you're still not released to return, or something's going on that's extended beyond those paid 2 weeks by the district, then it would roll into looking at regular FMLA. And the regular FMLA, it feeds into, okay, now you start consecutively using some of your sick time also. And let's say you exhaust all time, all FMLA, everything that's there. If COVID related, then I think we would look at, okay, if this is going to be a leave that extends beyond 10 days, do we go to an unpaid leave to where we could at least secure someone's position for the remainder of their contract year? But at that point, if I'm not sure, because of a COVID related thing, that it would drag that far. I think people are experiencing the COVID, and it might be people are turning around and recovering really quickly, even before their quarantine's up, and then you've got some that are probably extending a little beyond.
Well, then the CARES Act covers some of that too.
I don't think the CARES Act covers leave time, but we'll put Mr. Ward on the spot and ask him some more of those questions, but I do not believe it does.
I thought it did cover it through December.
So I can tell you the 2 weeks emergency COVID is on the district.
And then need for substitutes are going to be a bigger issue. We can't necessarily farm elementary students out to a variety of classes if the idea is to keep them with their cohorts for better transmission or to limit transmission. So Michelle, while you're here, what have we done to make sure that we're going to have plenty of substitutes, that that's not going to be an issue?
We are continually working to have an appropriate number of substitutes. So it's just like anything else. We will follow normal procedures to get substitutes in and fast track as many as we can to make sure that schools are covered.
So then that becomes a bargaining issue, especially in elementary. I know we've kind of let elementary farm students out to other classes in lieu of a substitute, but we also know for COVID, that's not the greatest idea in the world. So what are the contingency plans there?
Now, I think we have to look at, okay, basically we've got to have a sub, or we've got to have some type of adult has to be supervising a class. And so one way or another, we'll have to figure out how to get those covered. We're, like Michelle said, we're working to build our sub pool the best we can. My fear is we had a lot of folks that were through just, this is every position, not just teachers, that when working remotely, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to burn leave time while you're accumulating. So, while folks might have to burn a couple of days, you get 4 to start the year, and then if you get the 10 days that's provided by the emergency coverage, you probably earned some time that was not used at the end of last school year. So hopefully that provides some folks with a cushion. But what I'm worried about is, for our earn and burn folks out there, that now they've built up a small bank, and un-COVID related issues, they're going to be using up some of that leave time, which is again going to put pressure on the need for substitutes. So I think there's issues we got to talk about from both directions on that, because we want to make sure that people have the proper, they're not, under no circumstances if someone's sick do they need to be at the school. So it's just going to be on administration to work with the district office to make sure we've got adult personnel to cover those classes. Because you're right, we can't just lump whole cohorts together.
Right.
Do I think the main thing too is, if, all right, let's say you've got a situation, um, a situation where it's one or two kids and boils down to it, there was no other option, and the teacher had to accept those two kids, then it's really a matter of tracing and making sure it's well documented of who was in that class and for what period of time.
Chad, so what happens if, let's say that a teacher finds out that a student in her classroom has tested positive? What will be the expectations for that teacher and the rest of the students in that classroom?
If you had a wide scale broad exposure like that, direct exposure, we would be working directly with, of course, everybody would be sent home immediately, but we would be working with the health department, and they would give guidance to us, and they would do the contact tracing. That's their responsibility, and reaching out, and we work in connection with them to reach out to the families. And basically, it depends on what stage and whatever where everybody's at and what the symptoms are, whether it be from 10 days from exhibiting symptoms or 14 days from there's some different measures that the health department would guide us through, and we would lean on the health department to work as a partner through that.
Or what if, God forbid, we'd have to close down a school? What are the educational contingencies to continue with distance learning during the period a school is closed down? Have we had any discussions about that?
Well, I think that's the discussions that are going to go on tomorrow. I think there's some general ideas of what it would look like if we had a spot closure. Let's say the spot is a whole school. Then that's when it would be important that teachers have the ability, so we don't wind up in another edgenuity situation, to where teachers have the ability to use their Google Classroom and work with kids. That's why we made this major push to be one-to-one, which we'll be at, so that kids can move forward and teachers can continue to teach. And you would have some things in there where that's some of the stuff that's probably a better question for Weisskopf when you get down into the weeds on that. So those would be good questions to bring up tomorrow.
And if I can go one more direction, the ESE pre-K, they're having to do a lot of body function. As far as PPE, are we looking at additional gowns and whatnot for those individuals for their protection?
That's PPE that we'll be working to procure to make sure that if people have what they need.
And it's available, okay.
And the last thing we want is for PPE to be a barrier. So I know we're working hard to make sure we have all resources available.
Okay, so we've had great discussion. In your opinion, what are the items that we can agree on, that you can carry on to leadership team?
I think things I definitely feel like we've got agreements on that we're not going to depend on teachers to sanitize, full rooms for kids. I think I agree with you on that. Also, I feel like the temperature checks and screening will not be done by teachers, and that action is reserved for when kids are exhibiting symptoms, and not necessarily as a daily entrance into school. We didn't exactly say that, but do you feel like that's something we agree on as far as screening for entry?
Yeah.
Okay. We've agreed that we're going to provide, appropriate PPE, and we'll work to, work towards the goal of making sure that, everybody has enough to cover them through the week the best we can. But initially, we'll provide, and the expectation will not be for teachers to provide their own PPE.
Small classrooms, perhaps, social distancing.
I think those are things that we probably have not arrived at a conclusion at. I feel like the social distancing is going to be when feasible and when we can at this point. We're following, what we've been charged with by the governor for face-to-face schooling. Then social distancing full out 6 feet is going to be difficult. Now, I think that conversation could evolve also. What was the other point you said? You see?
Small class size.
Small class size. And, I think we've got some square footage and funding limitations there. So under normal circumstances, I think that's going to be difficult also. I don't think we've arrived at any resolution there.
Now, we've also seen at least one Lake County school, and I know it's happening in other counties, where they're asking the instructor to sign a waiver.
We pushed the idea of waivers around, and I can tell you in most conversations, the consensus has been it's not going to do any good. A waiver is about worth what the paper it's on. So I'm not sure whether it's anybody waiving anything. So
I'd be against it anyway. So
yeah, I don't see that as being something that.
But I know in one Lake County school, they tried to have the instructor sign waivers. So
Do for COVID?
Yep.
Okay, I haven't heard that, and I don't know that we don't have a waiver that exists right now. So I'm not sure about that.
Who's one of the charters?
That's not us.
I know. But they still fall under our contract, so.
Gotcha. And, again, that I can't do a whole lot with them sometimes, unfortunately. What about what are your thoughts on the leave? If I provide you with a document that kind of guides the leave, I can send that to you, and then are you okay just giving me some feedback on that?
Yeah, let me take a look at it.
Okay.
But yeah, for COVID purposes, I could see administrative leave, and I think we're going to have some issues that we need to discuss on which teachers might be eligible for transfers to virtual instructional because of their health conditions. That's I think, an area of discussion that needs to take place.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things, once we get a good grasp on how many students are wanting to go virtual and what we're going to have to allocate to virtual, okay, let's say, wow, we need a dozen new virtual teachers. Okay, how do you decide what happens there as far as people being able to move into a virtual school?
Yeah, what kind of criteria would we establish? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's about where we're at as far as discussions today. And I think tomorrow's discussion is going to, automatically yield more discussion points for this group. And as we narrow down the issues, but I feel like we all want the same things. We all want to make sense the best we can. But I appreciate you guys' points of view, and everybody has valid issues. So are we ready to? We've got a little over 30 minutes Do we want to venture into some other bargaining topics?
Sure.
Okay. The overview of kind of where we've left off and discussions I've had with the board. For the 1920 contract still open. We're facing an upcoming 2021 full book negotiation. I think we're going to have to come together frequently on the impact bargaining because that's going to be our priority as August rapidly approaches. But my, you guys sent over a counter proposal on some language, and I've taken some notes on that. And before we get deep into it, I just want to talk about what does it look like moving forward, because as basically we've moved past our 1920 school year and we've still got an open contract. And you guys do a pretty decent job of explaining, looking for money, not money. And things tend to drag. I think both teams, were doing the best they can to try and get a contract resolution last year. But at the end of the day, we didn't have the funding available to give what probably both of us feel like you guys deserve, which is some reoccurring compensation. So, so what our options are now is, do we continue on and try and close out the 1920 contract, or do we continue on with an open contract and possibly declare open book so we can begin working on that? That I can tell you what I've recommended to the board thus far is that we continue on and move to open contract. That way we can bargain language, and if the governor proceeds and signs the budget and money's available, then we're not stuck trying to close out a contract where there's no money there and we're holding up on available funds that we could be giving the teachers for the 2021 school year. And I know that comes with some challenges. And I see, as I'm reading through you guys' proposal, I'm like, okay, I agree with some of this, I don't agree with some of it, and I see it will work. But I have to go straight to the end, to where, there's a request for $500 a teacher for basically COVID relief bonus, and that's $1.5 million, and I don't have that. Do I think if we could serve that up, we could get this contract closed in a week? Probably. But I don't have that. So what we're faced with is we've got, still some, somewhat benign language. And if we put the language out there for a vote, even if I accepted every bit of language you guys had, I don't feel like we're going to get a contract ratified. And at this fragile time for teachers and community and kids, is that what we want to put forward, is a contract that's getting shot down, that's going to cause a tremendous amount of division when we're trying to unify to make sure we're doing what's best for kids come August. So that's just my perspective on it, and I'd like to hear what you guys' thoughts are as far as moving forward.
Well, my perspective is we need to finish 1920 contract, because whatever changes we make in work conditions will go into effect while we're negotiating full book, which is going to conceivably last more than a year. And so I'd like to look at closing out 1920 the best we can. And that's going to involve probably some sweeteners and work conditions if we can't come up with money. If any of my other folks have something they want to say, that's fine. That's my opinion.
I agree, but I guess my only question would be is the fact that if Chad, if you are saying that to try to continue, I'm not for sure how that would work with trying, because supposedly, I mean, it's basically somewhat two different contracts, because we're finishing up a 3-book and we're going to start another 3-year book. That's kind of, I don't know how or perceive that would work very well.
Yeah, I think we would have to get some guidance from PERC to make sure that we were communicating and documenting that correctly. So I feel like if with no compensation, trying to close out the 1920, I just don't have a lot of confidence in that occurring. And if it doesn't occur, then it goes out for a vote, it gets shot down, we're still spinning our wheels in 1920, and then, but there's, the minimum teacher salary and the 80-20% that if the governor honors what his original intention was, that's sitting there on the other side of this horizon, and we're still bogged down in 1920, are we going to say, well, I guess we need to move forward anyway so we can get to the money. So I'm hoping, we did a pretty hard scrub on full book on last time we went through it. And I feel like we're at some sticking points on some language. And I have a good feeling of where you guys' focus is on and where it would be in full book. So I don't feel like we could definitely, rule out a lot of, we don't have to probably do commas and capital letters this time, and really focus on the language that you guys are interested in, and be able to try and get money in people's pockets. Because at the end of the day, I feel like that's going to be the major issue. And we, as both teams, have set up a barrier to that happening. We're going to have some pretty angry people.
What an interesting remark.
Go ahead.
I personally do not feel that the teachers or LCEA have in any way been a barrier to teacher compensation for this last year. I think that all goes to the other side of the table. So to now say that it is a joint problem for us, it is a situation, but the teachers may not vote on that, but I guess that's the consequence, the natural consequence of the board's behavior.
You're entitled to your opinion, and I respect that. I'll have to say I disagree. I think I agree that it's a situation that we're trying to work through, and at the end of the day, it's our financial status that has guided us to where we're at. And
well, I do know that typically when there's a problem with finances, then the negotiation becomes work conditions, and we've seen no give on either side.
I think that's your opinion. I think we have.
Well, so
we have made some. We have made some concessions along the way.
Where?
We can go through. What's that?
Yeah, I'm not sure where, because I'm not seeing any. So just refresh my memory then.
Let me dig in here. Give me just a second.
Well, we have reduced the number of nights that teachers, I mean, because I can remember years ago, I mean, it was a lot more nights out. I don't know if that's what you called them, but
that was 3 years ago. We changed it to 3.
So I know that's been a struggle to kind of work with.
Yeah, that was 3 years ago when we changed it to 3.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about for this year. What have we seen changes?
Well, I'll review some progress that we've made as a group, and I'm not sure you would identify it as significant as relieving major working conditions. That's kind of up to you. You know, we've looked at some possibilities and exchanged some language of the coverage of classes at the elementary school to ensure that, you know, there's some release time that's guaranteed there. You know, some of the things though where learning walks has been a big sticking point, and you know, we're not willing to eliminate learning walks. I think that's the practice of trying to improve our instructional practices within the school. So
You've introduced a very detailed checklist on learning walks.
what's that?
In fact, there's been a very detailed checklist on learning walks that's looking beyond the original intent of trends.
And what I'm not familiar with that document. What are you referring to?
Emily has a
Framework.
page checklist.
The instructional framework and the checklist that goes along with that framework.
Okay,
Talking about.
so the instructional framework, I mean, that's what guides our vision for, you know, the way we do things in the district. So is it in opposition to the instructional framework? Is it just the existence of a checklist? Is it?
The instructional framework was supposedly developed from the checklist. The checklist is still used when administrators or whomever comes into the classroom. So whichever one you want to use, but it is supposedly, and there is a checklist that they use, whether it's regional people or administrators or coaches or whomever walks in that room, they still use that checklist. So why use a checklist if you have a framework? Whoever walks into that room should be able to look at that framework and say, okay, are we using it or not? It shouldn't be anything to do with evaluation. Now, I know in theory it is not. I understand that. I mean, but when they go back and discuss things, and I realize it's supposed to be trends, but again, there are some that tend to use it more as a checklist or something concerning to that. And then later on, they're thinking, oh, well, they didn't do this then. Well, now they're doing it, and that's okay. But, oh, I didn't see it there, and I see it now. Now I don't see it. I mean, it's like, yes, in the back of their mind, it is still being used as a somewhat of an evaluative tool.
Well, and that speaks back to the progress we've made. I don't know where Stuart went, but
I hear.
okay, as long as you can hear, the purpose of the learning walk this year in our negotiations, to where we established that the learning walk is to determine trends and best practices amongst classrooms and departments.
That was the year before. We didn't put that in this year. That was last year's language.
But
we didn't make any changes to that.
In the proposal that we've had, and we also outlined that what the tool is used for. What's that?
I think you changed the number from 4 administrators to 3.
No, that we haven't changed that. That was in you guys' latest counter proposal.
Okay, but as far as learning walks being for trends and not evaluation,
okay,
that was in the original 2 years ago.
I need to double check and make sure, because that language has been adapted a couple times, and we have made recommendations on and proposals on that language this current contract negotiation. I disagree.
Okay.
So you know, I think the intent there is we've made it clear contractually of what these are for, and whether it's, you know, the instructional practice framework or the framework, I can't really see that being developed off of the checklist. I think that you've got that backwards. But if there is a checklist that someone goes in with and it's non-evaluative, and that's how they're monitoring their thoughts, so acceptable is just eliminating a checklist, or What's that?
One of the check boxes does say evaluation, I believe.
I don't have it in front of me, so I can't tell you that. Administrators, would you like to speak to the checklist or check box?
I'm not exactly sure what checklist you're referring to. If you're talking about the Learning Walk tool, the Learning Walk tool directly is the exact same thing as the instructional framework. I mean, they are identical. So I'm not exactly sure. And the only thing evaluative on there, it's just what would be, there are 6 evaluation elements that would be, that are on an evaluation, but they are not part of the Learning Walk checklist that we would do. So I'm not exactly sure what checklist they're referring to.
Your Learning Walk tool.
Okay, all right.
That's a
So,
check.
okay, and I think we've given full demonstration on the Learning Walk tool and how
Mhm.
that information goes in and how it helps to identify the trend data and use it as a tool for good and not evil. And I just don't, I'm not sure exactly. So I'm not exactly sure what we're asking for, if it's elimination altogether, or
Is this a training situation?
is the process a training situation?
If there are teachers that feel that this is evaluative, but we have administrators that saying it's not, somewhere there's a disconnect. So is this something that is just happening with certain administrators? And then that comes down to a training issue for them. I also, since I did interrupt you, Chad, I wanted to say that Governor DeSantis did sign that the bill that will take Florida from 26 to number 5. So it's $500 million will go to public school teachers in Florida, and an additional 100 million will go to experienced teachers. So that 500 million goes to new teachers.
But say that again, and what was an additional amount?
$500 million will go to public school teachers in Florida, and an additional 100 million will go to experienced teachers.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. That's better than my worst fears. So that lends to our conversation on moving forward. I think we can talk about learning walks all day long, but money's what's important. So moving forward.
So while we're on the subject of money, I know last year, when we as the committee administrators or asked the board,
Charlie, you're cutting out.
so what did you set aside? Oh, my internet connection is unstable. Sorry. So is this, how do we know that we're not going to be in the same situation next year as we were in this year, where there was no financial planning in advance?
You cut out a lot, but all I heard is no financial planning in advance, and I just disagree. The fact we didn't have money to provide raises does not mean there was no financial planning.
But there was a $75 increase per student FP allocations that many counties used for raises. We chose not to.
I think due to the current status of our unreserved fund balance, that we directed those funds to where the areas of necessity were, to make sure we're still being able to function and keep everyone employed and not allow people to have insurance fly through the roof, and we address the needs of our employees the best way we saw fit.
And we went to the broker and said, without changing our insurance rate or what our cost is, they cut the benefits, they cut or increase the co-pays and so I guess what she's saying is there any guarantee that that's the way this money's actually going to be used? Or are we going to say we need it for our fund balance again?
I think if you read the statute and if you've done your homework on the
I have.
parameters that were set forth, then you know the answer to that question. Then the answer to that question is that it's specifically guided on how those dollars are to be spent. And there is a certain proportion, which with him announcing this additional funds, you know, I imagine that could make some adjustments, but if you have read up on that, then you know that those dollars will be directed towards teacher salaries and they can't be directed any other way. But keep in mind, we do have other things that we'll continue to contend with that they've also included, which is about a $2 billion increase to our FRS contribution from the district for next year. So there are things in the background that, you know, make sure we still do what's right for teachers, even if it doesn't wind up in direct recurring compensation every year.
Okay, so back to the original discussion, what have we made changes in that benefit teachers for this year?
Well, I think we have made some adjustments in some of the language surrounding learning walks. I'll get the specifics on that of what was done the prior session and what has been proposed this year. We have offered that common board configuration is not mandatory for that. Teachers are not required to follow recommended CVCs in their classrooms anymore.
Well, they haven't been for several years, but some principals still require it.
All right, but we're asking about what we've done.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Progress in language.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just curious. You know, so there have been some things that we've touched on and worked on. I can compile exactly what we've done, and we'll talk about it some more. But
it's in the document that is up there on your screen.
Well,
all I did was take your document that was back in, I believe, February. Don't quote me.
It was March 2nd, I think.
The document, you had the underlined portions were added. And then the green portion was what we had basically proposed as of today, basically. So all I did was take your original document that was back in, as I said, in February or March. So the underlying portion should be what we together, basically, whichever side, but it's what was done. For example, it said instead of observations, it was to visits at the very.
I say, okay, I had to pull the right document here. So yeah, we basically the changes that were made current year, and we've adjusted that language, like I said, in previous years. But you know, the first step was really making it clear on you know what that joint leadership committee would, what the true definition of what they can and cannot do and participate in. Just so that was just an adjustment and shifting of language mainly. We made some adjustments to clarify long-range lesson plans to just make it to where it was daily and weekly lesson plans, and that ambiguous term of a long-range lesson plan was not there. And so we did some minor adjustments there. As far as the language that was new for the learning walks, yes, we changed observations to visits to a teacher's classroom to remove any common language that would have to do with it aligning to a evaluative type situation. And we also added that some intent there with visitors to classrooms will respect the learning environment and minimize any behavior that might cause a disruption. We also made sure we tweaked some of the language and added that the purpose of the learning walk is to determine trends and best practices among classrooms and departments. So that was altered from the prior language. And we clearly established that the tool is not part of the teacher evaluation team, and information collected in the tool was not part of any official evaluation, will only be used to provide feedback, assistance to individual teachers upon request, because we had where teachers could not, that information couldn't be shared directly with teachers, so we kind of clarified that. And then we clarified that that the methods of rewarding volunteers for people who volunteer to cover classrooms could be determined at individual sites, because we had such a wide variety of the way those things were being done. And then it looks like we did, when it came to, we had a little bit, nothing much in teacher regarding teacher complaints towards a teacher, and clarified that notifications will be provided in writing. So those are some of the language changes that occurred in there. And then, like I mentioned before, actually providing release time for absorbing certain numbers of kids. So I went back and I made some notes on you guys' counter proposal that you provided. So we can go through those, and with the time that we have left, because some of them I feel okay with. So I don't know if that'll establish some progress, some additional progress. In the joint leadership section, you guys added some language. If any of the joint leadership meetings take place during school hours, a plan for coverage will be adopted. If any of these meetings take place before school hours, after school hours, or during the summer break, LCEA representative will be paid their hourly rate of pay. I think if that's an assurance you guys need, then that's definitely something we could do. I think those meetings generally happen within the contract period, but just to ensure that they do, I think that would be an incentive to do that.
But then what we get is the principal throwing out their duty schedule or master schedule and say, here it is. Oh, you got chance for input, so we met the contract. No, it wasn't. Just the opportunity to review and provide input doesn't really necessitate the intent and spirit of working with and developing a plan, just like you did with the allocation committee. You had a chance for input. Yeah, you were giving us the allocation plan and you said 2 days to respond, but no changes. So it wasn't true being a part of the committee that developed it. And that trend kind of concerns me.
Well, I don't see a trend. What I see is, I can rehash the extenuating circumstances that exist around the allocation formula this year if we want to spend our time that way, but I don't see a trend.
Okay.
And I think I've explained that to you. So there was some language in the
that effect in the contract.
What's that?
So we need to add language to the contract to make sure that it's not the trend.
It's up to you to make your proposals.
I'm just asking.
If you deem that that's a necessary proposal from your side of the table, then I guess then that's what you would do. I haven't seen any language that suggested that. What we've talked about is the joint leadership committee that we've had under discussion. So what I'm telling you is the initial statement that you guys have added in here, that you be compensated if it happened outside of those things, we're okay with that. When you move into the A section where it talks about extra student supervision and what it looks like for that committee, you guys added and will include all certified staff to ensure equitability. I think in both of the A and B sections, it's like you're we're allowing freedom for people to have input and assisting in developing these things to ensure equitability is the theme of it. But then we're setting parameters for them for their freedom to do that. And the first people that come to mind, though, with this A section is your guidance counselors. They're certified people that are part of you guys' group. And when they hit campus in the morning, servicing kids and parents right off the bat, I'm not sure that they're available to take part in some of these rotations. That was just my initial thought. And if we're saying that all certified staff have to be used for that, then I think we're restricting some services there. Are there any administrators that can weigh in as far as those rotations and what it looks like for extra student supervision?
But sometimes, and I'm just saying it's the equitability idea, because sometimes they do have duty. It's not before or after school. They have duty at lunchtime. And sometimes they don't have any. So just making it equitable as much as possible, because it needs to be. You can't just say that teacher A needs to have 4 weeks of duty and guidance has no duties.
Or if you got first period planning, you're automatically doing car or bus duty every day for the entire year.
Or 7th period free.
Yeah.
If they're a true committee and they've got representation and they're formulating the plan, are we formulating the plan here in contract language, or are we allowing the freedom of the leadership committee, joint leadership committee, to formulate the plan? Because every school is going to be different.
Correct. But again, we still have some that do not need. And just as Stuart said, they come out with a schedule and say, here, this is it. Well, they haven't met. There's no meetings. And of course, this year there haven't been, because now they're already doing schedules and duties and everything else for next year. And nobody's met with any type of representative from LCEA. They've just done it. So again, is the equitability there? Don't know.
I fully understand you can speak on behalf of LCA, but I don't think you can speak on behalf of what schools have and have not done yet. And I think that saying that they've created rotation schedules is a little bit ridiculous, because we don't even know what school's going to look like come August yet. So, I think the whole point, and that was part of the progress, was moving those joint leadership committee, even renaming it and moving it into its own separate article, so it's clearly delineated what the roles and responsibilities are within those committees and the freedom within those committees to make those decisions. I think that was a big step we made, and so that we can shore up the issue that you guys are saying, if they're plopping things down in front of them and they're not able to help formulate those plans. So that way, when it occurs, you guys can bring it to the attention. If it rises to the level of a grievance, it does. I hope that we could work through it and make adjustments if it did pop up in different cases, and we can work through the issues. But I think if we've got a few certain circumstances and we're removing the freedom off of those committees to make those decisions, we're not doing them a great service.
Well, they're already making schedules, and they're not, and changing things and changing working conditions, because we know that, and that's supposed to be an equity. I mean, it's.
How so?
Well, you have coaches now that are going to be teaching. They were supposed to be just coaches. Now they're going to be teaching classes.
Well, that's definitely something we need to discuss with the literacy coaches. And there's some pretty valid points that might be beneficial as far as, them providing some direct instruction. So, I mean, that's something we still need to get together and discuss.
Yeah, I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying, I mean, it's like it was something else that was put in, and it was a schedule, and it's on this joint leadership that it's a schedule. It should be discussed with someone, and they weren't discussed as far as we know.
And that is something that we do need to have some further discussion on as the literacy coaches. I know we tried to set something up, it fell through, and now we need to set something up again to discuss it. So I don't think either one of us are probably in a position yet to make a whole lot of informed discussion about it. But I mean, as far as them having a daily schedule that includes a couple periods of teaching, there's definitely some working conditions, as you guys have pointed out, that need to be talked about. And you've got that on the tail end of one of the proposals here. So we definitely need to discuss that. And just right up front, you know, I can tell you possibly one of the benefits, we'll have to see what comes down, but them being a classroom teacher with students attached to them, there's some benefits that come from that and some ways we can work with what
Well,
the
if they
state's doing.
continue
too.
best and brightest.
Well, not best and brightest, but they continue the best and brightest rules over into the minimum teacher salary. A minimum teacher salary isn't for everybody. So if they're a classroom teacher, there's some things let's get armed with all the information, and then we do need to have really soon some talks about the literacy coaches. In the emergency procedure section, you guys added some language about compensating for 2 planning periods if someone takes on extra students in their classroom. So is that saying like on the volunteer to cover for subs if they distribute kids in their classroom? The reason I ask is because
Emergency procedures, yes.
Yeah, because the reason I asked on another part, that to me it's like a compensation issue is probably this in as we're creating and outlining the responsibilities and what goes on with the joint leadership. Compensation issue there is probably not the spot for it. Whereas if we're talking about in Article 10, Section 20, when we talk about the substitutes and how we would provide some release time for them, that probably seems like a better place for it. So, I don't know. I would have to cost out, what that would be as far as paying for an additional planning period for a teacher if they covered a class or have absorbed a student, whether it be one or many. Each time we create one-off compensation, it whittles away at the ultimate goal of providing some recurring compensation. So I just want to be aware of some of the things that we set up with that. Guys, we've reached our 4 o'clock. So I feel like we need to set a date, and it needs to be very close. I know some folks, I don't expect all people on my team to be able to make it depending on when it is. And I'm okay with that as long as we have a decent representation. But I know with the things that would possibly come out of tomorrow's task force meeting, it's going to be a necessity for us to get together pretty quick.
Okay.
So let's look at some calendars here. I will tell you, I know there's a lot of folks, I will not be available absolutely for obviously the remainder of this week. I couldn't do tomorrow or Friday, and Monday I will not be available, but I can make myself available in the coming weeks anytime from there. I know traditionally that week surrounding 4th of July, a lot of people are hiatus. So I don't know.
So July 8th?
I think that's perfect for me.
Anybody have an issue with that?
It's fine with me.
Okay.
Noon again or morning?
I would, afternoons usually work better for me. So if nobody has a preference, afternoon works better for me.
Same time again, 2 o'clock?
That sounds great.
All right.
All right. Well, I appreciate all the healthy discussion. I look forward to meeting with the task force tomorrow, and we'll see what we have to build on. And good news from the governor, at least. That's great. So I'll be working in the background to see what that looks like also. So when we do come back together, we've got some thoughts on that too. All right. Well, thank you guys. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording at 4:03. June
We will look
24th.
forward to tomorrow.
All right, guys.